So how's everybody doing? Good. All right, we've got a nice crowd here for interaction. So hopefully we can be. This will be good for some interaction. So this is Java Devs Love TFS/VSTS. How many folks know what TFS is? Everybody? Yeah. VSTS is actually the cloud version of TFS, if you don't know. And that's Microsoft's solution. So I got the idea for this talk at Agile Thought, where I work. And by the way, we're hiring, so just feel free to use that information how you may. But I got this information from one of our developers. He's a really smart guy doing Java development. And at the time, he was using Java and TFS on-prem, and he was raving about how awesome it was. He really liked utilizing that than some of the other open source options. So that's kind of how I got the idea for the talk. So let's go to the agenda. I'll kind of go over this real quick. I'm going to give you an overview of ALM objectives and kind of what we mean. So like when you talk Microsoft talk, they came in, they called this Visual Studio ALM. Now I think we're moving to kind of a DevOps is kind of the term, right? So we're going to talk about DevOps and ALM, what that means, so you understand the whole package, why they do TFS the way they do. And then benefits of TFS, really why you would use TFS in place of some of the other options, like Jira or whatever. And what they've done actually to make it very beneficial to other development environments besides the Microsoft stack. And then we're going to go over real quick, kind of setting up how a Java dev might set up their environment. That'll be pretty quick. And how to set up VSTS to work with Jenkins or other tools, and what you might want to do, and some best practices. So we'll talk about builds, and we'll talk about release management and some stuff like that. Although Paul just had a talk on release management that was pretty detailed on that aspect. So real quick, well, I don't know, maybe not real quick, but overview of ALM DevOps. Back in early 2000s, you probably heard the ALM concept and application lifecycle management, what that meant. And some tooling was coming out around that. So, at the time, about 2005, Microsoft released the first version of TFS, very Microsoft-centric, but the idea was a application lifecycle management platform that really integrated from creating requirements all the way to deployment, right? So that's the idea behind application lifecycle management. And the reason why they built this platform is we want to capture requirements, then we want to code them and have source code around that, and then we're going to do some builds, and we're going to have some good engineering practices around that. And then, we're going to do some deployments. At that time, it was kind of not as good of tooling as we have today, of course. So that's really what I would say is the beginning of TFS, and they've really ramped it up recently as far as what they're putting in the tooling. And at first it started to be Microsoft-centric, but I will say I'm part of the ALM MVPs for Microsoft. Sorry. And one thing I've noticed is that ALM group is really open. Ever since I've been part of that, they've really been open to other non-Microsoft technologies and have really implemented a lot of new type of thinking at Microsoft around ALM practices, including integrating with Git, et cetera. And I'll talk with you about that. As I said, DevOps kind of brings operations into the picture. So, I think was it 2012, Paul, when they brought Release Manager, or was that 2013 release?
2013.
Yeah, so operations really started getting in the mix with this particular tooling with something called TFS Release Manager, which actually does deployments and helps a lot of automation around taking your code from in the source code repository all the way up to a production environment, whatever that means for you. So that's when they started doing that, and that's when we really started hearing DevOps terms around the TFS VSTS space. So, and feel free to ask questions anytime. I'm pretty cool with that. So here's kind of the modern life cycle. So we say with DevOps, and I don't want to bore the coders too much with the details here, but what we're doing is we're thinking of the development process holistically. So we start out with a plan. So we need to do work items. So I'm assuming a lot of you, are all of you using Agile processes? Yeah, using Scrum or? Okay, fantastic. My samples will work. You'll understand them. So we plan, right? So in Scrum we do some planning. We've got user stories or product backlog items, whatever you call them. And once we have that plan, then we start developing. We're coding, we're testing. Development means a lot of things, right? Once we are done with that, we need to release that. And we have some process that takes us to release. And we're really getting a lot of good tooling around releasing in the last 5 years, I'd say, with Puppet, Chef, some of those tools. Now, there's really a lot of really awesome tools that you can use to automate your deployments. And then finally, monitoring and learning, and that's a place where I think we're going to see a lot more growth. And that's really what we like to say is the monitoring and learning is really going to be feedback for developers. We really want to give developers and the team feedback on where there are errors. We want to give the team feedback on what are people using in real life, right? Are they using those features we deployed, or did we spend a lot of time on nothing? So that's where monitoring and learning, I think you're going to see a lot of expansion in that space. And so TFS, they're bringing modern concepts to developers and operations teams. So there's concepts like Agile Practices. So I just talked about work items. So TFS, probably since 2012, they've really had a decent competitive product for people running Scrum and other Agile processes so that I can, as a Scrum Master, manage. And I'll show you the work items in TFS in a minute. And so that's been kind of a plus there. They've really put some time into that. Continuous delivery, they've really always had continuous delivery. Well, not continuous integration. Continuous delivery, really, that's kind of, I would say that's since the release manager, they've kind of put that in. And source control. Now, I put distributed source control. So for me, continuous delivery means, it's whatever you want it to mean, but in the classic sense, it means once I approve a feature, I can push it all the way to production, right? So that's a good question. So for me, continuous delivery means the Scrum team it's met their definition of done, it's ready to go. You're probably going to have some gated procedures along the way, so I'm going to deploy to a QA environment. I'm going to deploy to UAT and do whatever my team does there, and there's going to be approvers along the way. And we've handled a lot of processes around, what are those processes to get it to production where that's a whole DevOps thing where the operations folks feel comfortable that we can push to production with the click of a button.
So basically, it would be like you're saying that I can, if I have a build approved for release, I can just push button, get it to my lower environments and up to my production.
Sure, and I mean you could theoretically you could just say, hey, our process is so awesome. We've automated so many things. We're so confident in our code. We're just going to automate that delivery all the way to production. I don't know too many people who are doing that, right? Most people want gates, but you could automate it up to UAT, let's say, right? So we can get it to let them do their approval process. The big win here is it's a very repeatable process. We don't have operations folks following manual steps to deploy things. We're actually, I don't know if you're in that environment, but I've been in an environment where we hand off, oh, here's the steps to deploy, and
okay, so it's like Bamboo.
Exactly, Bamboo's a similar product. There you go. I'm trying to Ansible Tower, right? Is that I think that's the Ansible product. Yep.
Okay.
So that's where we're going with continuous delivery. And continuous integration, I consider continuous integration, I'm making sure the code integrates well and it's passing unit tests usually. I'm not actually doing deployments on continuous integration. Source control with TFS, boy, up until I think it was 2012, they finally introduced Git. But before then, it was centralized source control. Now you have a couple of options. So in both VSTS and TFS, I have Git integration and I have the TFS standard version control, which is a centralized repo. And that was kind of, to me, that was a big turning point for the TFS team as far as we're going to bring other products into this ecosystem. So we're not just going to do Microsoft applications. We're actually going to embrace Git. Now you'll see Sonar Cubes integrated very well, Artifactory. I mean, all kinds of third parties, whatever you want to use, there's probably something there for you. So it's a very nicely integrated, really orchestration engine for your ALM or your DevOps process. And finally, there's transparency. Because we're doing all these things, we have transparency all the way from production back to the features that we did. So like I said, this is kind of later in space. So let me show you when I'm talking about Git integration, because to me this is super powerful. I have to move this. Here we go. So if you haven't seen it, this is VSTS, and this is my sample here. So this is kind of your dashboard when you start out. And what we're really interested in is right now, I'll show you our backlog real quick because we can do some cool things with Git and our backlog. So I've got a backlog here. I can do like Scrum, sprints, and everything. But I've got this story that I'm going to write some code for, right? And this is story 55. So I see the ID is 55. There's other ways you can do this, but for purposes of the demo, this is an easy way to show you how I can link this product item to a commit from Git. So I can go code. One of the cool things is we can, using Visual Studio Code, I could actually do some coding here. I'm going to show you Visual Studio. And just to be clear, you don't have to use the Microsoft product to integrate with VSTS. You can use IntelliJ from JetBrains, Eclipse, whatever you want to. They all integrate with this. So whatever your IDE is, it's up to you. But the cool thing is in code, I can see your standard Git pattern. So I don't have it set up here, but you might use something like Git flow to set up. Is anybody familiar with that, Git flow? So that's a pattern for how I do branching, right? So whatever your branching strategy, you can have it here. You can have multiple Git repos for each project. So we have, in this one I just have one repo, but I really have two branches, a develop and master. And what I want to do is I want to set up a workflow between the develop and master. So pull requests are the way we do this. So if I'm coding, and I'll show you an example, oops, bring up my IDE here. So I've got an IDE. Oh, great. Technical errors, so I'll show you. So in my IDE, I make a change, do a commit. I'm sure you've all, does everybody understand that? If you haven't done Git, but if you have, you understand commits. So I've done a commit. I commit that to my local branch. In Visual Studio, I can actually use either the Git commands. If I'm familiar with the command line, I want to use that. You can do that. I'm more of a GUI kind of guy, so I use the Visual Studio commands there, and they allow you to sync, do a fetch and pull, whatever you want to, all basically using the command line, but I just have to click a button. So, I'm kind of lazy programmer here. So, so I've done that, and I'll show you the pull request. So the cool thing here is once I commit that to my develop branch, I can create a pull request. And from the pull request, this is where we can have approvals and we can have code reviews by your team. So this is one that really, the developer I talked to, he thinks this is just really awesome, the workflow here. So I've got this testing for COB pull request. Now if I had multiple people in here, unfortunately I just got me, you would probably see multiple pull requests here by each developer, right, during the day. But the cool thing is we can review the code. So if I had some files, I would do some file comparison. I can do a discussion, you know, hey, here, change this line or whatever, you know, you can have a discussion, add some discussion there between the team, and this is all kind of, you know, done in asynchronously. But also, I can approve this, right? So we can set up a rule within our team, and this is what we do. Hey, 2 developers have to approve this, and then you can commit it back to the master branch, right? So that's kind of a workflow you can have. You know, it's up to you how you do that. But this is going to track all your workflow, so it's approved. Once it's approved, I can close that. And I could delete the source, but I don't want to delete dev. That's pretty important. It shouldn't have.
No, it looks like this is actually merged.
Oh, did it say that? Ah, cool.
Right there. Go down.
Oh,
Up.
To the right, it says complete. Merge
It says develop
successfully.
and master, right above all comments.
oh yeah.
Successfully merged to develop and master.
Oh, cool. Okay. So you can do that. You don't have to set it up that way. I think that's mainly because I didn't have any changes, but it wasn't showing changes. But normally you would merge that. But you can set up the ruling however you want to do that, right? So that, like I said, and then there's history. I can look at all my different requests. So here we go. First check-in. And then we've got the branches. I can look through my different branches on that page. So this is all done through our web UI, and pretty cool stuff. The cool thing about that is, and let me go back to the pull request here. We can look at the completed here. So if I check this one, I should be able to see, actually, so you can see here I've got the files, got the discussion, and I can look at the commit with everything associated with it. So that's all there within your code. So just a quick, any questions on that? That's the, don't like that. Oh boy, I gotta restart this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting
Sorry.
because our organization is all on the Atlassian toolchain.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
this, what you just showed is what Bitbucket is in their thing.
Yep.
It's interesting though because they're talking about wanting to move us to TFS. So as the director of the Java team, this makes me feel more comfortable because this, I don't want to say they copied it from Atlassian, but this looks pretty much exactly the way that the workflows you would use Jira to Bitbucket to Bamboo. So the 3 products that they have for
Right, exactly. Yep, they do. And it really, I'm not going to say one's better than the other, but I do believe this really puts TFS in a good, TFS, VSTS, and VSTS is kind of where they want you to go as the cloud, right? But they're putting you in a very good position around that. So let's see if I can start this up again. had that happen. Yep. Okay. So actually, let me go with the next slide. So one of the things that really that kind of showed is, and let me put this back up here. It showed that, to me, it shows the transparency. That's to me, there's two things that are really relevant when you're using TFS and VSTS, and really helpful. And there's a lot of transparency. So I can see, where my commits are. I can see how they relate to my features or my products. And so, if you're using Scrum, you may be using epics, features, product backlog items. Well, I can now tie code back to those features fairly trivially through seeing my commits, etc. So that's very helpful. I can also go forward to the release, right? So I can see, hey, what's in the release? What code got changed? What PBIs have been put into the release? So there's a lot of transparency around that. There's a lot of transparency around your work. So if we go here.
Is there like a self-hosting version of this, or do you have to?
Yep. There's on-prem. TFS is the on-prem solution. VSTS is the cloud. Very similar. I mean, usually TFS is a little behind in features because with the cloud version, they're releasing what, like every three weeks, right? Yeah. So they're releasing new features every 3 weeks and fixes and whatever. On-prem, it's not quite as frequent. I think it's I was going to say every quarter they're doing a release. So, but yeah, certainly very, very similar features. So, so for instance, let's if we go here to our PBI, if we look at these links, I can see the different commits that were requested, that were associated with this, and the different pull requests. That's all contained in here, so I can look here. I can write queries, etc. against that. So a lot of reporting options, a lot of transparency really in this. And the other thing that I think with VSTS that's really helpful is the extensibility, and that's TFS as well. So on TFS, there's a way to write extensions for TFS. Also in Visual Studio Team System online, there's a marketplace, and I can write Visual Studio VSTS extensions going against their REST API. There's really all kinds of ways I can add things. So for instance, when they first started VSTS, maybe there wasn't a Gradle command, right, to do the builds. I could actually write my own Gradle command and parameterize it or whatever. I could push it out to the VSTS marketplace and have other people use it, or just have it privately for my own company. TFS is very similar in how you can add those kinds of extensions. The other part of extensibility, that REST API, that can be used for a lot of different options, right? So that's definitely something you want to look into. So let's take a look at the builds. Since my PowerPoint's kind of failing me now, I'm going to go out and just do some demos for you. So VSTS build is really extensible, and actually quite easy to set up your definitions now for standard tasks. The cool thing is, like I mentioned, with extensibility, you can do some very complex things with this if you need to as well. So if I want to create a new build definition, and let's say I'm a Java environment, I've got a couple options here out of the box. I've got the Gradle and Maven. Do we have Ant here? Yeah. Yeah, so we've got Ant, Gradle, Maven. I'm actually not as familiar with Maven, so let's check that out. So I'm doing a Maven task. I'm going to build out a Maven, and I've got a couple options here for my repository source. So obviously the project I have, so however that could be TFS version control if I want to have centralized. But normally most Java shops are doing Git, so I would probably have a Git repo behind all this. And so I'm using the team project, but if I'm using GitHub, I could certainly go there if for whatever reason I wanted to use that. And another remote Git repository or Subversion. So we've got quite a few options here as far as where's my source code coming from. In this case, we're going to that team project, and I certainly, we have multiple repos in a lot of the projects I'm on, so I would pick whichever repo I want, and then what branch I'm doing the build on. So I could do it on develop, right? So every time I have a commit to develop, maybe I want to do a continuous integration. And then here's your default queue. This is all about, in the background, how I'm building. So that gets a little important if you need to have third-party extensions on your build server, as far as where you're pushing that. So keep that in mind. If this may be hosted, but maybe you want to put in your own build servers. You certainly can do that, and then they would just show up here. So lots of ways to do it. So I'm going to just create this initially, and we'll see what happens here. But pretty simple. We've got the initial build steps. So I've got a POM file. I can put in some options. Is the goal to package? Yeah, maybe. Most likely I want to do some tests, right? I want to run my tests. So whatever your pattern is for your results file, you put those in there. Code coverage, let's see, that reminds me, do we have Sonar Cube here? Because I think I would want to, so we could do Sonar Cube, and we could add this. You may have, it's MS build, so yeah. So, but you can add those kinds of things. Oh, it somehow added that. Oh, here we go. So you've got a bunch of options there. Again, I'm just doing Maven. I haven't done that before, but here we go. So I could do that if it made sense for code analysis, for code coverage. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those tools, to be honest. So I'm not. And then as we go here, you've got control options, pretty standard stuff, right? Continue on error, always run, timeout. So that's all kind of simple to put together with a nice little GUI on what we're doing, right? So that's our build, and we can save that, except I probably need to delete these. Code analysis. Take that off.
Probably have to delete that MS build thing at the bottom on the left.
Oh, thought I did that, sorry. Did I not do that? Thanks. There you go, save that. There we go. So now I've got a new Maven. I also put a Gradle sample out there. Obviously not working out too well. Need to look into that build with who's breaking the build, right? But again, this shows you how you can set this up to go against the different builds. You can set up different builds to go against different things like Gradle, et cetera. Sorry about that. So real quick, just to show you the release manager part of this, this actually will integrate with your definitions. So So again, very similar to the build engine, right, as far as how we do release management. We can do deployments. Right now I'm doing things to Azure, but you certainly don't have to. So I might start with an empty definition and then add services. Oh, that's what I was going to show you, the Jenkins. So again, we can use the VSTS build service, but we can also use something like Jenkins if you want to. The feedback I've gotten from some other Java devs who are coming from both worlds is they prefer the integrated VSTS build system, but you may not. Maybe you've got a bunch of build definitions in Jenkins, you don't want to mess with them, right? So, or you just prefer Jenkins for whatever reason. I'll show you after this how we set up Jenkins. It's pretty straightforward. So here, what we do to create a new release definition, well, there's the project, the build definition. Here, this is really, how are we going to deploy? So maybe we do the Gradle build sample, but basically what this means is when this build completes, I'm going to kick off this deployment, right? So you may be familiar with that in Bamboo. I haven't really looked at Bamboo, but I'm sure they have something similar. And we can do continuous deployment or not. This could be manual, right? And then you select the queue. I'm just going to go with the default. And now I can add my different tasks. So obviously you're going to name an environment. Maybe that's dev, right? And then here's where you add tasks, right? So if I'm going to, I'm doing Azure, so I'm going to do maybe cloud service deployment. I would add that. Oh, I should do the resource group first, probably. And so here I'm going to do my RM subscription. Templates, etc. So again, I've got all these different options here to create my RM template. So, and I can do each deployment step. So here this is deploying to a certain service or a certain VM. I'm going to deploy to that. I can do a lot of things. If you're really interested in diving deep into release management, I think Paul's talk has some really deep discussions on how to do that. But the idea here is we have a lot of ways to set this up. Then we go to our artifacts. We take this build, and it's going to, we're going to take those artifacts and we're going to deploy them out to the different environments. So that's how our release manager works. So let's go back here. We talked about Jenkins. Just to show you real quick, setting that up is actually pretty simple. If we go into our settings, we have something called service hooks. So this is, your administrator is going to have to set this up. But within service hooks, this is where we can hook in some of these third parties. So maybe if I've got a Jenkins server out there, I think we're doing Artifactory off of this. This is just really where you can put those different servers out here. And you're going to create a subscription whenever you're doing these. And now you have some other things. So you can use Bamboo if you want, right? I don't like their release manager. Let's use Bamboo. You certainly could do that. But of course, we've got Jenkins right here. And we're going to go through and figure out what we're going to do. Now here, trigger this type of event, build completed. Probably not. I really want Jenkins to do the build, so maybe I'm going to do it on code pushed or pull request merge created. So I can select the repo. For me, it's just one option. And my target branch, don't really care, but probably going to do develop. Maybe I should do master, depending. And then we could have requested by member and reviewer groups. So lots of different things here. Here's where you put in your Jenkins server information. So you're going to need to know some things like your build token and build, etc., that are going to come from your Jenkins server. And then you just, you can test it once you enter that information. And assuming it's all good, now you've got that Jenkins service hook, so if I want to use that in my releases, I can use Jenkins. So we've got integration between Release Manager and Jenkins. If I'm using Bamboo, I would put in a Bamboo service hook as well. And the reason I do it here is so that I have some traceability on those builds, right? So now, while Jenkins is running everything as far as the builds and Bamboo's doing the deployments, I should be getting some information back from them when I do my builds so that I can do some reporting and have some traceability. So again, that's how you can set up a lot of those. So somebody forgot to turn off his email. Apologize for that. We'll close that. So the other thing, I think we talked about the Java development environments. What are you guys using for your IDE? Are you?
IntelliJ.
Yeah. Do you like that?
Oh yeah, used to
I've heard.
for years now.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome tool, right? those guys, JetBrains, are pretty cool. They got some good stuff for sure. So, the other thing you could do is if you're not using Jenkins, maybe you're using TeamCity or something from them, you could integrate that as well. I'm sorry I didn't show that. But, similar stuff, right? You just need to have administrative access and some information, then you can set it up and test. So that's kind of working through all the things. One thing I did want to say on your Java dev environments, you can use IntelliJ if you want. Visual Studio also has some free additions out, so you don't have to have the MSDN subscriptions, but I talk with your folks. If you have the MSDN subscriptions.
I'm in the minority in my company there, so yeah, it's mostly .NET. So.
Okay, yeah. So, but believe me, a lot of our developers, they love IntelliJ and they'd rather use it than VSTS, and it's your call, but I think VSTS is Visual Studio is a great environment for me, but the cool thing is whatever environment, whatever IDE you're using, you can hook in, and there's a lot of options for you. So, free ones like Visual Studio or Eclipse, Visual Studio Community is free, right? Is Code, that's another one, right, that you could use. So, and I think Code runs on multiple platforms, not just Windows. So you've got a lot of options on your dev environment and the tooling you're using around it. So, and I showed you, now we can integrate with SonarQube. So you get lots of great code analysis besides what comes out of the box. There's also out of the box code analysis options here as well. But SonarQube seems to be an industry standard. So the cool thing is they're making it very easy to integrate. So since my slides are a little wonky, I'll open it to questions. Really, that's most of what I was going to go over, but I'd love to hear any feedback. If you see any holes in what we're talking about, I could certainly speak to it.
What's under test?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can get my mouse there. Sure, so test is going to be, we can create tests here on the web UI. They have a tool, MTM, Microsoft Test Manager, that can help you create manual tests and do some tracking, but also help you with automated testing, right? So we tend to have a philosophy of, obviously our developers are doing unit testing. They're going to use something like XUnit or whatever to do developer tests, those little micro tests, and we have those running, and we do code coverage. That stuff's all covered. Like when I talk about SonarQube, we see a lot of those code metrics. This test is more around what you would think of a traditional QA. For us, it's testers within a sprint, and we'll have testers doing manual tests on the UI during a sprint, but also writing some automation against APIs, right? So those tend to be more stable than UI. And so this tool allows you to do a lot of things. Manual testing, automated testing, and load testing. And there's a lot of ways to integrate that into our builds, our deployments, so that you know, what we try and do is run smoke tests every time we deploy to an environment. So and through automation. So we have some standard smoke tests that we'll run. We do that through release management. So the pattern is we deploy to an environment, we have smoke tests for environment dev, let's say. If those pass, then we say, hey, all's clear in dev, go to it. Usually in dev, everything's pretty automated, so we'll send something to our QA gatekeepers and say, hey, this version's ready. If you want it in QA, go ahead and approve it. If you don't, it's okay, because they usually are not deploying every day or whatever it is, right? They're deploying less frequently. But that's where we use some of the automated tests. So if you're doing that through here, you can actually grab those tests easily through your either release management or the builds, right? So in the builds, I can do some test automation. So if I'm doing like API testing, again, those I like to do on in a release, because then I'm going to have the environment up and I can run, you know, against real data. But you could also do those API testing if your devs mock out the APIs on the build side, and that would give you some good code coverage and some good, what do I say, trust around that. Yeah. Cool. That's a great question around tests. So, and in here, like, we're using that for load testing, so that's a different different environment. One thing I will say, if you're doing a lot of these test automations, you do have to add test agents, servers, or at least a server for a test agent to run that. So we're trying to automate that so everything is automatically pushed down.
Azure server, right?
That's what we're doing. Yeah, we're using it. We're actually using PaaS services that we're testing, and then we'll do like VMs for the test agents out in Azure. So it's really, you know, and if I'm throwing out terms that you're not familiar with, let me know. I kind of assume everybody knows what PaaS and IaaS are, but that's kind of new. So infrastructure, which are VMs, and PaaS, which are like, you know, web front ends and web APIs that are a little more lightweight. So that's how we're deploying. And again, we're running tests. Even the manual tests, you know, they can, through this test tool, the manual testers can actually mark where it fails and give a lot of information to the developer about reproducing the steps from here. So what'll happen, they'll automatically create a bug. The developer will look at the bug, be able to talk to them, or at least see the repro steps. They'll get you know, screenshots, that kind of stuff in the tool. So it's pretty nice tool. And again, that's all, you know, to me the big win here is it's all integrated within this VSTS or TFS, and I can do a lot of cool reporting around that. So it depends. So if you all have MSDN licenses for your Visual Studio, it's pretty straightforward, as I understand it. You know, and I'm not a licensing expert. Paul, if you've got any licensing game, you can.
You own MSDN, you own TFS.
Yeah.
You own VTFS or just TFS? Or
TFS and what, 5?
It has 5 free licenses if you have an MSDN subscription.
Okay, and that's per subscription? Or do
Per
you
subscription.
Per subscription, yeah.
And it's got, now I don't know how it works when you try to
like
combine
aggregate,
them.
yeah, like you have
But
flash.
I don't know if they'll let you do that.
Okay.
But with on-prem, or even VSTS, you're supposed to have a client access license to go from your Visual Studio to your whatever your development environment is to work with VSTS or TFS. You get a free CAL, a client access license, with each MSDN subscription. So
Right.
everybody who has MSDN already has all the licensing they need for TFS.
Right, and I will throw out too, if you for non-coders, so if you have business analysts, those types of folks who don't need access to do a lot of you know, adding code, creating tests, creating builds, if they just need to look at the work items and kind of do some viewing, there's stakeholder licenses which are free. So when you add people to this, they normally, if you haven't associated their MSDN subscription yet, they'll get a stakeholder license so they can do some things, but it's pretty limited. You know, it's
Stakeholders
Yeah.
and
Yeah, but it's really fantastic for those, managers and on up who want some visibility, but you probably don't want them like manipulating data, like you said. So, yeah, it's to me pretty cool stuff. And then you've got stuff. I mean, so we talk about those code pulls, etc. You can actually. Actually, here I should go. Let me go do that. This is your dashboard that all the team can see, so I can create multiple teams under here, and each team has their own dashboard. So one of the things we're doing is they want to know about pull requests, right? So, so what I can do is I can come here to this pull requests tab, if I can get there, really. So, is this where I can do it? Oh, it's not. I have to do the widget, but I can do commits actually. Here we go. If we go to Explorer, you can actually do some things from the dashboard, right? So that here I can do that. So I can add this to the dashboard if I want to see an overview, right? And so let's see what that looks like. You click add to the dashboard, come back here. That's probably down there. And there we go. I've got 3 commits in the last 7 days. So you can add a lot of information around your code here that maybe is interesting to your team. So as your team progresses and you need to know information and you want to have it one place where the whole team can see it, this is a great place to do that because all of this is configurable on this front page, right? So you notice we got sprint 33, we're working on that, and boy, that's a crappy burn down, but team members, all this stuff, that's all configurable. I can just go in here, assuming I've got those powers, I can go in, I can edit it, I can configure things, etc. Pretty straightforward. So a lot of really cool options to customize this. Any other questions, comments? No? You got what you wanted out of this?
I did, sure.
Hopefully, yeah, cool. Do you feel comfortable now with?
Yeah, I mean, like I said.
It's not going to ruin your life?
No, I mean, as a Java developer, all the Atlassian people are Java people. So their tools are agreeing to work with on the Java side.
Sure.
So I was reluctant to switch me and my team to this, but after seeing it, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it looks like it's pretty much they copied everything that Atlassian was doing.
Oh, I'm sure
The processes, to the way it looks, to the way your pull requests work, the way you have your diff on your comments it really feels like the same thing. The only thing that's different seems as release management, but that's not my problem, or something, that's somebody else's.
Oh, come on, the whole life cycle is everybody's problem now, man. Okay.
But yeah, so for me, it's giving me less worry about my team's ability to function using a stack that wasn't like Java centric.
Awesome. Well, let me know. I can give you my card if you want, but I can put you in touch if you have some Java questions or whatever. We have more than a couple devs who've gone through it, so they can, they actually love developing in Java, and like I said, they're super excited about this stack. So, so they might have some good input if you have any questions. Cool. Well, thanks a lot. And like I said, I'll put my card out here, so if anybody wants it. Thanks a lot.